Well, hello everyone. So this video, we are talking about a very basic camera. However, despite the fact it's very basic, it still offers a pretty good price point for entering into the realm of film photography. And the camera in front of you is the Olympus OM2000 spot metering. Now, before we jump into the technical aspect or the features of the camera, I want to give you some history or basic information about this particular camera, the OM2000, in comparison to, say, a Olympus OM4 Titanium. Okay. Despite the fact they are all Olympus, this camera, particularly OM2000, is actually not made by Olympus. It's made by a very large OEM manufacturer in Japan called Cosina. If you haven't heard of them before, it is okay. I think they prefer to stand behind some other brand names and just making accessories, making camera accessories, making cameras, making lenses behind other camera manufacturers' names. So, namely, the OM2000 is based on the Cosina CT-1 35mm film camera. And with that CT-1, Cosina also pitched a whole bunch of other manufacturers, including Nikon, including Canon, including Ricoh, probably someone else, Sears maybe even. So the concept is pretty simple. The Cosina CT-1 is a pretty tried and true mechanical camera that Cosina actually modified for different manufacturers, basically removed some of the features of the camera, and then in turn to mass produce them and market them for all the other manufacturers as their entry-level camera. So it's evident here that OM2000 is actually Olympus's entry-level film camera back in the days. So with that out of the way, just know this is not a true Olympus. This is more like a stepchild of the Olympus family line. And in terms of design, it's completely different and out of Olympus's very, very intuitive design, where the original Olympus OM series incorporates both shutter speed and aperture on the lens. Makes shooting quite a lot more enjoyable, at least for me. For the Cosina CT-1, and over here I'm just going to call OM2000, they made a mechanical film camera with kind of a slapped-on spot metering function. So why I call it slap-on, and I'm going to show you guys later on. But first, let's just go through this camera and look at its design, its construction, and its features. Okay, film camera, full mechanical camera. There is no auto exposure anywhere here. You turn the aperture ring on the lens, and you turn your shutter speed right here directly on the camera. There is no auto exposure. However, it does have a meter built in. The meter is a central weighted meter plus a spot meter, which you switch with this little knob over here. So right now it's at central weighted metering. If I push this forward, you'll see a little orange light. That's spot metering for this camera. Okay, so it's got 2 metering modes. It's pretty good, right? I mean, kinda. I'll show you guys why in a little bit. But in terms of the shutter speed, this camera features a shutter speed, pretty decent shutter speed range, all the way from 1 second, including a B bulb mode setting, which you press the shutter keeps open, and you lose it, the shutter opens up when you release the shutter. So the 1 second shutter speed. Anytime you hear a little spring working inside, you know this is a mechanical camera. Okay, anytime you don't hear any spring sound, so anytime you hear this little mechanical whine, you know this is a true mechanical camera. Okay, and anytime you don't hear the shutter whine when the shutter opens for over a second, you know this is probably an electronic camera. For example, the OM4 Ti is fully electronic. Anything's controlled by capacitors. Okay, so I set it to 1 second. I set the exposure mode to manual, and let's do exposure. So there is no sound at all. You just hear the mirror and the shutter. There's no mechanical whine of the spring. Okay, so now you know this is a electronic camera. That's a quick way to differentiate or know if your camera is whether film, electronic or mechanical. Features of electronic or mechanical shutter. Okay, this one, a mechanical shutter, which is quite nice. I personally prefer a mechanical shutter. It's more reliable and you don't ever need a battery. Even though this camera features a battery spot right here, the battery is purely used for metering function, okay? So let me just put a battery in here really quick. And the battery cap is plastic, so pretty cheap fitting plastic battery door. And it uses two LR44 or SR44 batteries. So basically, oops, you just line up the polarity of the battery according to the thing it says here. So positive facing that way, and this is positive. I'm gonna just put it in here and close the battery door. And this is how you install the battery in this camera. Very simple, and it uses standard battery that you can get for like a very good price, okay? With battery installed, that meter activates inside the camera, okay? So now you're gonna look into the camera. I'm gonna try to show you guys, but kind of hard. See that little light over there? That's your meter. So why I say this meter is kind of like a slapped on meter is because it's very basic. It doesn't give you any information in regards to your aperture setting or your shutter speed. It basically has like 3 dots. 1, 2, 3. 1 is a plus sign and a dot in the center and a minus sign. Basically, if it's in the plus sign, it means the scene is going to be overexposed, and if you have a minus sign, that means the scene is going to be underexposed. And you adjust, try to get the dot in the center, which is a green LED light. Kind of hard to see. I'm going to try to take a picture and show you guys later on, but for now, just a demonstration. So if I change my aperture, you'll see the settings change accordingly, okay? So depending on the aperture, it's going to give you a correct exposure, a underexposure, or a overexposure. That's how basic this meter is, okay? The difference between the central weighted metering and the spot is if you put it on spot metering, it's gonna meter for that center area, probably the area of that prism. No, but again, if you point it over there, and you can see there's an orange light right there. The orange light indicates this is a spot metering mode. It's gonna only meter the very center part of this camera, like that little round circle area over there, which is kind of good if you want a more precise exposure. But then again, it's slapped on because it doesn't give you any of those information at all. You have to, after you metered, you can't see your shutter speed, you don't know your aperture, you just turn until it goes green, which defines the purpose of, having a meter built into the viewfinder, right? So if you look at the implementation on the original Olympus OM series, I'm going to show you the starking difference. You're going to see a full shutter readout at the bottom, shutter speed, and aperture. The aperture doesn't show here, so the OM4 only shows the full shutter speed, and it gives you a exposure metering bar. So you kind of know like where you're metering at, and if you change, if the scene changes, or you can do the like spot metering right here. So if I'm using spot metering, it tells me I'm in spot mode, and it averages a whole bunch of different values after you take a spot metering. So it gives you a whole wide range and a lot more useful information before you make an exposure compared to the very primitive meter in the OM2000. So that is the difference, okay? Entry level, however, mechanical shutter is pretty reliable. There really isn't anything wrong with the camera. It's just, it feels like cheaply built. And if you open the film door is opened by lifting this up. So if you lift the film rewind up, you can lift up the door. The back of the door is fully plastic. The top plate is fully plastic, bottom plate fully plastic. This camera, even the internals are pretty much plastic, okay? There really isn't much metal parts going on here. So I guess this cast area is aluminum, okay? So only this part is metal. Most other parts are plastic. So it's very lightweight, okay? So for ladies who really hates a heavy camera, like, you know, as a comparison, like if the EOS 1V, pretty heavy, almost 1,000 grams. This camera probably with a lens is about 600-700 grams, not even. So very lightweight, okay? It does feature a simple hot shoe on the top, so you can use flash. The flash sync speed is actually pretty good at 125ths of a second, which is much better than my Leica, which only syncs at 50th of a second. And also the Olympus OM4 which only syncs at 60th of a second. So in terms of flash sync speed, it's pretty modern and up to date. You change your ISO speed right here. This is not DX coded, so you can't really put a film in here and have the camera automatically detect the ISO. However, it does have a film preview window, so you know which film you're using during shooting, so you don't get confused. And the ISO is set by just lifting this, is it lifting? Maybe. Yep, lifting this up and then just turn the dial, and when you finish, just push it down, and the ISO speed is set. The ISO goes all the way to 3200 and as low as, let's see, probably like 100. Oh, actually goes to as low as 25 ISO. Pretty decent range. Again, most films today range from 150 to 800. So this camera is more than enough. And one quirk that I don't like about this camera is actually the physical off button. If the camera's lever is right here, you really can't click the shutter. I mean, while I appreciate they did build a off button here, I don't appreciate they actually built the off button right on the advanced lever. This makes left-hand shooter quite miserable because when you shoot, this thing has to be pointed out when you are shooting, okay, in order to make exposure. If you cock your shutter and you try to put it in front of your eye, you can't click the shutter with the lever in here, and if it's out, it's gonna poke your right eye. Okay, so very inconvenient for left eye dominant shooters. That's one thing to take into consideration when you try to buy this camera for your personal use. Now, one thing annoys me is the sound of the shutter. It's extremely loud, okay? While the film advanced lever is very smooth, this shutter, when it fires, it sounds like a freaking machine gun. It's just so loud, everybody can hear you, and if you're taking pictures on street, people is gonna look back at you and say, what the heck you're doing, because it's just way too freaking loud, okay? Now, if you're doing a lot of architectural work, and if you're shooting abstract work, you don't shoot street photography, this camera is still gonna be great for you. It's a great way of entering film photography on a budget. This camera doesn't cost much. The OM4 cost me over $400 when I bought it. And this camera, you can probably have it for around, $75 to $150, depending on the condition. That's a general going rate for this camera. The advantage, I guess one huge advantage, is this camera, being Olympus, takes Olympus OM Zuiko mount lenses. So for example, over here I have a whole bunch of really nice Zuiko lenses that you can use on this camera, which is fantastic, okay? Now, everybody knows that the most important thing about a particular camera system is not the camera itself. It's actually the lens. So having that said, having an OM2000, but a fantastic Olympus lens, which is both compact and sharp, will definitely help you take better pictures, okay? That's just the truth. The lens is more important than the camera. Now, with that said, I would strongly suggest you invest in a good lens when you start out on film photography with the film cameras, compared to actually spending money and buy a really expensive body, but buy a very cheap kit lens. Okay, so this lens is, if you ask me, pretty much junk. The 35 to 70 millimeter, I did a review for it. So hit that review link on the top right if you're interested. but this actually usually came with the OM2000, and this lens that you probably guessed it, Cosina made. In terms of optical quality, it's just you know, mediocre, below mediocre. This actually is a horrible zoom lens. I would highly suggest you guys, when you buy this camera, go out, buy a really good fixed focus lens like the Zuiko 35mm 2.8 or the Zuiko 50mm 1.8. Both of those are fantastic choice to go with the OM2000. Now, something that I really like, or I find interesting about this camera is, despite the fact this is very entry level, okay, they actually built a few advanced features in here. So for example, this button here is for multiple exposure. And while all my other cameras don't have multiple exposure functions, that one probably does, but the other two does not have multiple exposure functions, and they are much more expensive. This one, being the cheapest of the bunch, have multiple exposure function. How you do it is this lever, it presses down. So when you advance your film, you take a shot, take your first composition, and so instead of advancing directly, you're gonna press this button down, and you're gonna advance. So the film counter actually doesn't advance. So you can compose your shot the second time and take your shot. And if you want a third exposure, it's also possible without advancing. You just press this down again and advance. So it's still staying at 13 or 12, doesn't advance. You take another shot. So 3 compositions for your multiple exposure. That's pretty nice that they have a multiple exposure feature built into this camera. For me, I never use it, but for film students, I guess if you want to be creative, this is a great camera for you to start out. Now, as I mentioned, the meter is pretty basic. However, it's pretty accurate. It does a central weighted metering that's, you know, gives a SAM reading as my OM4 or my cell phone light meter app. So like for me, I would even highly suggest you guys not use this meter, but instead use your cell phone's light meter. It's going to be more accurate and more intuitive to use. And then you can set your shutter speed here very intuitively and look at the aperture and set it and then make your exposure. Okay, that's what I would do. Okay, all right, so this camera, being very entry level and probably towards beginners, they assume that you probably want to take it out and take some family photos on a tripod using a self-timer. So for that reason, this camera actually features a self-timer right here. Okay, you can just press this self-timer down and cock your shutter. Actually, what the correct step is, I'm gonna have it wrong. All right, and the shutter slap is pretty significant. So to use a self-timer, you're gonna have to first cock your shutter, okay? With that cocked, you're gonna press down this lever so it doesn't advance itself, you know, automatically. And when you finish composition, make sure, remember, if you put the lever here, it's not gonna fire. So you're gonna pull the film out, lever out, and compose and fire. Of course, set your, you know, whatever reading that you need to do. And you'll see that the self-advance lever starts to advance, and then it's gonna take the shot. So the good thing about the self-timer is when you actually press the shutter, again, this is kind of another advanced feature that I didn't expect to find on this camera, is if you use self-timer, it also features it also functions as a mirror lockup. So I'll show you guys what I mean. So when you take the picture or when you press the shutter, you see the mirror flaps up. That way it actually reduces the shutter, reduces the mirror slap when it takes the picture. And when you finish, the mirror just goes down. So that way, if you do macro photography, this self-timer function is going to be, again, quite useful. So I would say this camera, you know, particularly extremely useful for film photography students, okay? Because it's got a whole bunch of features for you to, you know, figure out, for you to discover. And you don't necessarily need a meter, because nowadays every camera can be used as a meter. Every phone can be used as a meter. So that meter function really is it's a fail-safe and it's nice to have, but it's not necessary. And again, I'm gonna wrap up my video like right here. I'm gonna say that this camera, for its price and for its ability to take any Zuiko lenses, you know, right from when you buy it, is fantastic value. Okay, so just for the fact of being able to use very compact Zuiko lenses, I would buy this camera. And if you're a film photographer, you want a backup camera, you own a whole bunch of Olympus OM1 through OM4, you could get this camera as a backup. Okay, just saying, you don't have to get this, because a lot of diehard Olympus fans is gonna say this is a stepchild, this is not really Olympus, it's a Cosina. Whatever is being said, this is a capable entry-level camera for everybody to have. All right. So if you guys have any questions about this camera, feel free to ask me in the comment section down below. I'd be happy to answer those questions for you guys. And if you found my video helpful, please do hit the like button or subscribe to my channel. And I should have more video about film photography coming out for you guys. So thanks again, and see you guys in the next video. Take care.